You can abbreviated version, but we're now recording, so
Okay.
now you can be official.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the July 10th, 2018 Special Transportation Advisory Committee meeting. We'll call the meeting to order. I believe we have a quorum. And let's start with introductions. Tim.
Tim Roberts, City of Colorado Springs.
Larry Manning, Dollar Monument.
John Miosatos, PPACG.
Brandy Williams, City of Fountain.
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County.
Shelley Cobos, City of Manitou Springs.
Rick Orphan, Fort Carson.
And Brian Vituli, City of Colorado Springs, Mountain Metro Transit. And in the audience, please.
There's some people on the phone.
Okay, and who's on the phone with us? Who was that?
Somebody with CDOT.
Say again?
Can you say again?
Oh, it's
Okay.
Michael Snow.
Thanks, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
And there's someone from Manitou Springs, I think, was on the phone before.
Yeah, Taylor Gertz with Manitou Springs.
Thanks for
Taylor.
calling in.
And in the audience, please.
Andy Martell, I'm Chief Street, and I'm Laura Newman here, supporting Manitou Springs.
Okay.
Ken Brader, PPACG.
All right, thank you. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda for today, please?
So
Go ahead.
move to approve.
And is there a second?
Second?
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Public comments for items not on the agenda. Is there anybody from the audience who wishes to speak publicly? All right, thank you. Item 4 are regional development plans, the reason that we're here today.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I tried to put something together to sort of keep us, where's the from the beginning? There it is. There we go. To keep this on track. And I think actually Victoria kind of said it best in her email that she originally sent out saying, hey, if there's an opportunity for the region to be included in any sort of package that brings new funding into the region, it's our job at this level to find out what those opportunities are and package the information in such a way that our elected officials can act on them and don't just sort of kick the can down the road to those elected officials. So, Victoria, thanks for putting it so succinctly. So that kind of gave me my marching orders moving on. Before I move on to the next slide, Mr. Chair, if I could ask that we quickly let Mr. Kirby introduce himself.
Thanks, everyone, for allowing me to attend today. My name is Tim Kirby. I'm with CDOT. I'm representing the Multimodal Planning Branch in the Division of Transportation Development, and I apologize for my tardiness. I'm probably the only Department of Transportation worker in the state that gets lost habitually everywhere I go. I'll save you all the irony of that explanation, but happy to be with you guys here today.
Thanks for coming.
So I think the first thing that we want to sort of cover is what's available, what's sort of the bigger picture here. So I found the initiative language on the Secretary of State's website, and right now the initiative language reads that there are, of the funds that would be gathered for the 0.62 proposed sales tax, 45% of that would go to the state highway fund, and that would be distributed through your the roadway development plan. So this region already has a roadway development plan. You saw probably an email that I forwarded to you, I think a couple of weeks back, that Andy had sent to the board saying, hey, there's additional funds. We're going to look at the development plan, and that's when they sort of talked about adding I-24 to that list if that was to move forward. So that's that 45%. That's being covered by that existing development plan for roadways. And Tim, again, if I get any of this wrong, you won't hurt my feelings if you correct me, but just be gentle. Then there's the 15% of the ballot proceeds that would go to the Multimodal Transportation Options Fund, which we're going to talk about in more depth because that's really what we're talking about. And then 40% of the total would go to the local transportation priorities. That is the funds that goes through, I guess, the road and bridge formula as part of the HUTF, where the monies come back to the cities, towns, and counties. So those are funds that are going to go back to you, and you're going to be able to allocate those just like you would those existing funds. Back to that 15%, again, sort of the drilling in deeper why we're here today. Within the initiative language, it talks about that 15% for the Multimodal Transportation Fund. And it says of the first $30 million of that 15%, they're going to make principal and interest payments to projects that are going to be bonded right out of the gate that are selected by the Transportation Commission. After that $30 million is taken off the top, the rest of the 100% of the remaining 15% gets divided 85% to go through the local process, which in this case I think is going to be the PPACG, and again working with our partners at MMT, and then 15% that is going to go to statewide projects. And those statewide projects would be things like Bustang and other things that are determined by the state. So there's 85% that's going to come through to us. Right now, the recommendation of the TRAC, I think I said that correctly, and the STAC is to have 9% of that 85% come into the Pikes Peak region through our TPR.
John?
Yes, Michael, please correct me.
Yes, this is Michael Snow with CDOT. Actually, I wanted to clarify something. The regional planning allocation that was devised by the TRAC subcommittee and approved by TRAC and STAC has nothing to do with this ballot initiative.
Oh, good.
It is purely for planning basis. It's just for the measure of the development program and determining proportions of the Tier 1 to be identified by each region of the state. In the ballot language, it says the TC will adopt a formula based on population and ridership that will determine the portion to be allocated directly to the MPOs, and then it would be the rest in a local pool that gets decided by the Transportation Commission and distributed throughout the non-MPO regions. So that formula right now is not known. You could surmise that the planning allocation of 9%, it might be somewhere in that ballpark, simply because the planning allocation uses population and ridership, but it also uses a couple other criteria that are not called for in the ballot distribution. So it may be close to that, but that decision isn't even going to be addressed until and if the ballot actually passes.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That's a great clarification. So yes, it could be 9%, but it could be something else, and again, that's going to be further down the line. And actually, remember the phrase "further down the line" because we're going to get to that again here in a second. So again, remind everybody what's already been done. The last time this TAC met, there was concern that the Transportation Commission had met previously, I think the day before, and there was only one project listed from the Colorado Springs region on the list that the Transportation Commission looked at. So the TAC then on that Thursday said, hey, we would like to add 3 additional projects. So the Colorado Springs bus storage facility was added, the regional park and rides was added, and the Manitou Springs Transit Center was added. And I shouldn't say was added, there was a recommendation to add those. So the next day at the STAC meeting, we take that recommendation, we gave it to the Norm Steen, who is the region's STAC representative. He presented that to the STAC and said, hey, as long as the list is being developed, we'd like to add these 3 additional projects. And CDOT staff said, yeah, sure, we're taking that, just so you know, it's a list in progress. Just because it's being added today doesn't mean it's going to make the final cut, which takes me to, I believe, the next thing, where we talk about the final cut. Nope, actually, we're is it the next one?
Almost there.
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit. So in the original email, there was a question about, hey, if we do add projects for transit, are we going to need to remove, for bike and ped, are we going to have to remove transit? And the answer to that is no, because of those projects that we have already forwarded, two of them, as they were working out the details with the jurisdictions, two of them didn't quite seem to fit the spirit of what CDOT was looking for as far as a ballot list to sort of put together. Michael, we might want to chime in here about why some of these were removed, but I'll do my best to kind of give an overview. But the bus storage facility, not only does it need to be over 10 million and bondable and have 50% coming from the sponsor, but it also has to be constructed in the next 5 or 6 years. 5 years. And I think when that discussion took place with Colorado, with the MMT said, well, it's a two-phase process, and we're not going to be able to do both up front. And so I think MMT reluctantly withdrew the project, but understood what the rules were and agreed to do that. On the park and rides, a majority of our list was CDOT park and rides, but not all of them, but the others were Colorado Springs projects, park and rides. And so that, again, was sort of the discussion. I think the bottom line on that, and Michael, this is where you probably need to really help me out, is the spirit of projects was not to combine or pool projects, but rather find individual projects that would sort of get the imagination fired up in the minds of the voters, so that they could see projects that are going to move forward, and just pulling projects, again, in the spirit of what was trying to be accomplished, didn't sort of do that, especially if statewide, then everybody would put together a pool of projects, right? So then you'd have the Denver pool and the Boulder pool and the, wherever pool. So Michael, is that too much of a 50,000-foot level, or is that somewhat accurate?
No, I think you got that pretty, you calculated that pretty well. The regional park and rides of which CDOT would be sponsor, first of all, you wouldn't want to be bonding for those because that requires a 50-50 match, which means somebody else has got to come to the table to match it with some other source of funds. Whereas CDOT-sponsored park and rides, we're going to be working with our any and all other fund sources to pay for those outright. So it wouldn't be much of an advantage for the region to utilize a portion of what would likely be your slice of the multimodal pot to fund something that would otherwise be considered for things like 267 funds and Senate 01 or our FASTER fund or some of our existing Mustang funding. Then you mentioned, John, that some of the park and rides conceptualized in a pool might be other park and rides that are not CDOT sponsored, and you're correct in that it goes against the spirit of the intention of the program to just create pools for general type of things. Now, that's not to say that if you wanted to say park and ride improvements or park and ride construction, and it included, let's say, 2 concise locations, in which case you're distinctly identifying that, that would probably be a viable project. But it doesn't sound as though, just in terms of its total dollar size, it may not really reach that criteria or that threshold that is appropriate for bonding.
Okay.
So it still kind of remains up to you all to hash that out. If that's still an option, we'll continue to talk through it.
Okay, I guess that was the first I've heard that it was still an option, because sorry, did someone want to say something? I didn't mean to.
Well, John, am I correct in knowing, what was suggested was a 15 million pot, and the park and rides that I'm familiar with, there are 3 or 4 at least, but those are all the CDOT sponsored ones.
Right.
So the question would be, are there $10 million worth of park and rides other than those?
After we move the CDOT ones, is there enough to still get to the $10 million threshold? I did not believe that there was, but in what you had said, it made it sounded like it was still up to us and not that we had not met the threshold. But Brian, can you help me with this?
Well, there are a couple on that list that, in the hasty prioritization that we were doing during our 10-minute break, that
Brian,
was...
if that's you, I can just barely hear you.
Okay, I'll speak up. As we were trying to prioritize what park and ride projects to put as part of that pool, we included, of course, the CDOT ones, but there are a couple others. US 24, 31st Street, feel that there's still a strong need for that. Green Mountain Falls, Cascade Park and Ride, I'm not really sure. Some of these projects have been on the long-range transportation plan list for many cycles. So I'm not really sure of the need of Green Mountain Falls one. The Northgate one I know is not one of our priorities. We have a park and ride. Well, CDOT has a park and ride at Woodman and Monument. Not really sure, but there could be others that rise to the surface. I know there are others on this list. Falcon. The county's building the Falcon one already. So I'm just not sure that we could really get to a list that's, aside from the CDOT park and rides, that would meet that $10 million threshold.
Yeah.
Okay, so
It sounds like even if it was a conglomerate of sorts, it sounds like a number of different potential match sponsors, and in which case, let's say that they were all City of Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs has 3 locations who want to do that. I think the Transportation Commission would likely say, that seems like a good project for the multimodal bond ballot list. But if it's one of them in the town of Manitou, one of them in the town of Colorado Springs, one in, all these different sponsors, it looks a little bit less like one big project and rather a whole bunch of little ones. So just at a first glance, I'd say you may have quite a ways to go before you could to make that happen. But let's keep the conversation open on this, and if you learn of local sponsorship and the local entities really do want to get behind it with 50-50 match, let's keep talking and talk soon, because we've got just a very short amount of time here before CT considers this for adoption.
So, Michael, let me recommend this then, because what's going to our board tomorrow, because that's the thing is I think we've been under the impression, and Tim, you correct me if I'm wrong, that there was some deadlines involved here, that the Transportation Commission needed to act on a list, and they were having a special meeting or joint meeting with STAC in mid-July. And so that way, by them finishing in July with their list, that would allow the Blue Book text to be written in August. So what's going to our board tomorrow will say regional bus pull-out package, or excuse me, a bus, darn it, come on, John. We'll say regional park and ride package. That will continue then to be in our recommendation that moves forward. And then I think what we'll do then, as far as at this point, if Colorado Springs or El Paso County has what you're talking about, a identifiable, very specific list of projects that are over $10 million and that they wish to go through the bonding, they can contact you guys to do that. My understanding was we had it on the list that someone from CDOT did reach out and contact the jurisdictions and looked at that and had already removed it. So I thought it was fait accompli. I thought we were done with that, but now you're holding out hope that that's still something that's on the table. It might be on the table, but time, I think, is against us. So I think we'll leave it in the court of the jurisdictions to make sure that if they can do it, they can, and it'll be our blanket sort of park and ride lot description and what our recommendation is, so that will not deter our jurisdictions from moving forward. Is that a good way of moving forward?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Just make it really clear to your board tomorrow that if they're recommending that particular park and ride, regional park and ride, that it's explicit, that it's contingent upon agreement for local match sponsorship. Maybe just, that way the expectation is known as it leaves, And I wish I could speak to who exactly David Cuttinger has spoken with, as in which entities. I know he's spoken with Craig Blewett of Mountain Metro. I don't know if he's spoken with anybody directly the city of Colorado Springs to know if, to be able to, knowing that, I guess it would allow us to eliminate the possible park and ride candidates. And maybe we could save ourselves this complication if we knew that, but don't have that answer right now.
Hey, Michael. The only conversation that I know of is a conversation late last week between Jeff Sanders and Craig Blewett. And that's where the new information that we got about the bondable projects having to be completed within 3 to 5 years. And that's why the bus storage expansion project was taken off that list, because that $16 million is the total project cost. So that involves the first phase of building an expanded storage facility. But as our system grows and expands and we need more space, the second phase is another contractor facility next to it. So that's, and that likely won't come within that 3 to 5 years. It'll happen within the next 20 years for sure, but not in 3 to 5. So that's why that project was taken off the list. But I don't know of any other conversation, at least with Mountain Metro, about the park and ride pool being taken off the list. So I'm not sure where that came from. And I know, the projects, the park and ride projects that are on this, that are in green, that we recommended at last month's TAC meeting. The US 24 31st Street Park and Ride, that came out of the US 24 West EA, I believe, right? So I don't even know if it's proper to have MMT as the sponsor of that. I mean, I would assume that's a CDOT park and ride facility, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Well,
and as same with all these other ones. I know that our MMT is next to that as a project sponsor or partner, but I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's better that it's a CDOT facility or what. So I'm not sure what to do with the park and rides. I know there's a need, but I don't know if it really hurts us to not have them on this short list. But
and actually, Mr. Chair, let me go on with the rest of the presentation, so then you all can decide if this is something that you want to worry about. So then the question was, and again, I think put very succinctly in the original emails that sort of came out about, hey, if there's an opportunity we need to move forward, is, should we add projects? So my understanding is that the bonded projects, again, which is comes, and the repayment of the bonds will come out of that $30 million off the top of the multimodal 15 prior to the 85-15 split, will be selected by the Transportation Committee. They may not count that towards the HUTF formula or the locals, and therefore PPACG projects that get selected by the Commission may constitute additional funding for the region, but it may not. The Commission has not set policy on this yet, and they won't until after the election. So you could go through all of this to come up with projects and find them really fast, and then after you do that, and you've locked yourself in, you realize all you've done then is take away funding from your more flexible pay-as-you-go pot. So it's kind of, it's the risk-reward thing here. So you all have to decide as the jurisdictions, and I can't tell you what you want to do. If you guys say, yeah, we want to move forward with the park and ride lots, then I'm going to do everything I can to support you. If you decide you want to move forward with some sort of bicycle or pedestrian project, I'll do everything I can to support you. But the risk-reward is if it is counted as part of our funding, then you've locked yourself in, you've locked yourself into the additional rules of the 50% match, you've locked yourself in to the 3 to 5 years, when perhaps you didn't need to, because if it doesn't count towards our funding, the money would have just flown through the natural formula, and it would be part of the funds that we would go to our development list. It's important to note that the development list that we are approving tomorrow at the board meeting, as well as the development list for the roadways that we already have, and the development list for bicycle and pedestrian projects that we're going to develop in the next coming months, and we're going to have Betsy here at our meeting next week to talk about getting that development list underway. Those can be changed by PPACG through our process. So if the transit development plan that we approve tomorrow, if in a couple of months we sort of look at it and say, boy, we really should have done this or that, we want to do it, well, then we take it through our committee process and we change that development list, and then we forward it on to our friends at CDOT, and that will be the list that will be used as the funds come in if this thing passes, and that they will work down. So again, you're sort of trading the, hey, this might be additional money, that's the reward, but the risk is if it's not additional money, you've locked yourself in and you don't have the same sort of flexibility. I think I'm belaboring the point a little bit, but that's where we're at on this. And again, we've already talked about the transit. Again, the bus storage facility has been removed, so if we add a bicycle pedestrian project here, it would probably be all right to do so, and we don't need to sit there and go through the exercise of trying to remove something from transit. Because remember, as difficult as this is, there's a difference between the development plans and the ballot activities. So the transit development plan was done correctly in that it was supposed to be just a list of transit, and it's supposed to be there for opportunities that arise for transit. We will do one for the bicycle and pedestrian. This whole idea of because the ballot language specifically says multimodal, then all of a sudden we're sort of mixing apples and oranges, and that's where this additional thought processes come up with multimodal. I think it's not been anything deliberate. I think it's hard to get your hands around, especially when we talk about bondable bicycle and pedestrian projects that are over $10 million that are ready to go in 3 or 5 years. You know, I think that's kind of hard for some folks to get. If those projects do exist, however, and it is possible for us to move those forward, if there's something that you're comfortable with your jurisdiction wanting to bond and pay 50% of, and you'd be ready to move forward in 3 to 5 years, I think CDOT would like to hear that, and I think that we would do everything we can to take it through our process tomorrow to move that forward. And that's my last slide, is do we have any projects within the jurisdictions? Does anybody here have a project that they'd like to throw on the table to talk about bicycle and pedestrian? And if we have silence for a long period of time, then we can maybe go back and talk about if we want to do something, and if so, what that thing is about the park and ride lots. So at this point, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it for the members to chime in on what projects they may or may not have.
If we're talking bikes, are we talking about facilities that are already engineered? Are we talking like shovel ready?
Within 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
So it's a good question, right? So again, that 3 to 5 year period, the question is how quickly can you move, right? You know, I've seen folks across the state that are very committed to, I mean, and let me put this into perspective, too. I mean, you know, a $10 million bike trail is a huge project. The biggest bike and pedestrian trail I can think of that's been constructed in the last 10 years has probably happened on the US 36 corridor. That was $16 million. That's a huge project, right? So for us, we're just not seeing a lot, but the few that we have seen, folks are coming forward with very deliberate match intentions, but they're not necessarily, what they're telling us is that, you know, we have a plan to start environmental by X date, get through environmental by X date, go to construction, and it all fits within that 3 to 5 year window. So, you know, if your environmental isn't done, I don't think that's a deal breaker. I think it's just what's the plan in place, what's the clear timeline and schedule to work through those steps to make sure that you would hit kind of those markers. That's kind of what we're looking for.
Okay. The one I have in mind is the city just completed a Shooks Run study, and it's approximately 4 miles, and we have an estimate of $19 million. It's not shovel-ready. We know there's some right-of-way issues, so I was just trying to see what exactly we needed to, what stage we needed to be at.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things, you know, I try to inject into this conversation is, because I'm seeing this conversation statewide, which is people look at that bonded list and they think to themselves, if I'm not on that bonded list, my project's in jeopardy, right? And again, you know, bonding is a funding mechanism, and it's useful in certain instances. There's going to still be a significant amount of money that's going to flow to that multimodal pot that can be used for these types of projects. So I don't want you all to have the impression that if I don't get a bicycle and pedestrian project on this list tomorrow that would go into the blue book as part of the bonded pot of multimodal funds, that project's now off the table. That's certainly not the case, and that's why we want to work with John and you all to make sure that we have a good inventory of what the bicycle and pedestrian needs are within the region, so we can make sure that those are, you know, are taken under consideration, you know, especially if the measure passes. And so, you know, if you're kind of like thinking about this, you know, is this something that could go, but I'm not quite sure yet, you know, and you don't meet that deadline, you know, I don't want you to feel like the boat has sailed, because it certainly hasn't.
Brandy.
So if it's not in the blue book, does the boat look the same? Does it still need to be over $10 million? Does it still need to be bondable? And does it still have to have a 50% match? Or are there different requirements?
Yeah, so, you know, for the bondable projects, you know, the match requirements are there. So to answer your question directly, the boat looks different, okay? Right? So because, you know, the way that those dollars are going to flow down, you know, when it comes to bonding, there's very specific requirements we have to see around bonding, right? And, you know, there's a threshold we have to get past with bond authorities, and that's why that bar is set so high. So when it comes to that flow that's outside of the bond, or that bond list, the flow does look slightly different. Mm-hmm.
So does that mean the threshold might not be as high? It may not have to be a $10 million project?
There will be no.
There will be no threshold, right? You know, and so the reason that threshold's in place is because it doesn't really make sense to bond on $1 million project.
Right, that makes sense. I just want to let Tim know that if there's other stuff, and maybe it's a portion of it, maybe it's not all 19 million, but at least you could get a portion of it paid for.
Okay. And will these projects, you know, will they need to be in the long-range plan?
It's, yes, but we can amend the long-range plan, especially, or we can move forward with the one we're doing. The language that says what needs to be in the long-range plan is that, well, first off, it's being paid for with federal dollars. This is not. It's, you know, CDOT money. It's state money. Mm-hmm. Then it says that it's capacity improving. Well, none of these projects would be capacity improving because they're there. But I think what it would come down to would be the definition of, is it regionally significant from a funding point of view, i.e., this funding comes from around the whole state. So we would put it in there. I would say that the feds aren't going to, you're not going to need any federal clearances to move forward with because you're not using federal dollars. So we'll put it in, but we can put it in whenever, and it's not going to slow down your project. That's my take on it. I don't know if you've got a different take on that, but I don't see it being a problem.
Yeah, so the way that I look at it is there's a difference between what's required and what's recommended, right? We always recommend that projects be in a plan before they go to construction, because on some level that insinuates public involvement and some level of concurrence with your constituency that it certainly is a priority. Now, I think that there are processes in place to make sure that gets done and we allow the public to comment on those things. But from purely a state perspective, we're not necessarily federalizing these projects, so any federal regulations that would exist around planning processes wouldn't necessarily be in here. Now, there are a number of state regulations that we would need to keep in mind as we move forward.
Anything else from anybody? Okay. All right, so we're okay with those two projects remaining on and those other two coming off? And John, will that, at tomorrow's board meeting, will that be passed along to the board that, despite this TDP going through all the committees and it being presented to the board that way, that there were last-minute developments? So is that going to be passed along to them tomorrow?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yes. If there is an item on the agenda that talks about our transit development list, and at that opportunity we would say, hey, beyond the transit development list, there's the ballot, and we did have 4 projects that were forwarded as they were being vetted through the CDOT process. 2 have been withdrawn, and it's these 2 that are going to move forward. Okay. So yeah, as far as we're concerned, we can do that, and quite frankly, that's much easier than saying, oh, by the way, now that we've removed 2 projects, we want to add another one. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an easy sort of thing to take to the board. But again, my job, no one said it was going to be easy. So if you do want to bring something else, or you want to try to leave something on, then we'll deal with it. Don't worry about me. I've had an ulcer before. It's okay. But if you guys are comfortable again thinking that again, if this moves forward, if it becomes quote unquote a separate bite of the apple, there's 2 separate apples. If these 2 projects make it, is that sort of sufficient to say that we've gotten our fair share? And that again is subjective. I'll leave that up to you. But the other part of it is, and again, I'm not trying to lobby one way or another, but I think this is an important consideration. If we talk about what that bondable list is, I think, and some of you have already seen it when it came through the Transportation Commission the first time. Again, there are a lot of projects outside of our region that are relatively big in size, so it's probably to our advantage, how should I say this diplomatically, to say that we should push for any projects that is part of that be included in the formula for distribution in the long term. Again, it'll be the Transportation Commission that is going to make that decision. But again, I think as part of the ballot and for the ballot to pass, there are going to be a lot of projects identified in that illustrative list that are outside of our region that are going to be needed to be listed for the ballot to pass statewide. I'm trying to delicately tread here, but hopefully I think you guys get what I'm saying. Or do I need to just be blatant and say we're gonna go after those other guys and make sure they're not running away with all the cheese?
Yeah. Okay. We're good. Yeah. Okay. So at the board workshop on Friday, were they made aware of the recent developments here? So they're not going to be blindsided tomorrow by this?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yes, at the board workshop, I did my best to sort of explain this, but again, this is a difficult, and I apologize that I haven't provided better information. But a lot of things are not available, and things that I thought were available, only now did I find out that, well, no decision's been made on that. So we've gotten some great support from CDOT, the fact sheet that you received this morning. I think Herman probably stayed up all night rewriting that so we could send it out to you. Tim's made the trip down here. Michael has been great sending us emails. So I think it's just a matter of it's unfortunate that by the time we sort of figure out what's what, and I'm able to put together the information, it's the day before the board meeting, and I apologize for that, and I think I can do better at these things as I'm here longer, but I think it's just a matter of that's the way the information was presented, especially when you have an outside source, the business group that's associated with the Denver Chamber that's putting this together. They're part of the puzzle, and again, they're not necessarily getting all the information out, and then the information then has to get to, the Transportation Commission, and they haven't necessarily made decisions on things. They're very good about sharing information, but they just haven't decided anything yet, so there's nothing to share, and then that flowing through the process. So it's been difficult, so I think what we basically told them on Friday, I know I'm making this a long answer, but what we told them on Friday is we're still trying to figure this out, but from what we understand, there may not be it might not be new funding, but if it is new funding, we're going to make sure our jurisdictions have the opportunity, if they have a project that's ready, to go after it. But we did make it clear that it would be a very difficult sort of uphill climb, so they won't be surprised if we bring something, but then again, they won't be surprised if we don't either.
Okay. Shelley?
Thanks. So the question I have is a member government that does have a project that's remaining on the list. Should we have a project representative at the board meeting tomorrow if they have questions on the specific projects, or is that a meeting that you would like the CAC members normally attend?
I think it would benefit you if somebody's there, like yourself.
Okay.
Yeah. Not to volunteer you, but yeah, I mean, it would be good to have the project representative there. And the thing that, not that it concerns me, but, we used this project, this line item that was in the long-range plan, and it had a $2.6 million price tag. And the project description hasn't really changed. It still says structured parking and Manitou shuttle operations. If, at some point we should probably update this project description to be more in line with what you're looking to do, that three-phase, $17 million project. But that's where it may come in handy for you to be there tomorrow in case that question comes up.
Okay, and what time is the meeting tomorrow?
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock and here?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Sure. All right. Anything else anybody would like to share? I mean, I know we're scheduled for another hour and a quarter, and that's great, but...
You won't break my heart if we end early, and Tim's got to hit the road,
Yeah.
but I believe Tim had something
Yeah,
to say,
sure,
Mr.
Tim.
Chair.
Mr. Chair, the one thing I will impart on this group is because anytime, inherent in these measures that come up when new dollars, everybody does what they rightfully should, which is worry about their local area and be concerned about the fair share. And I think when you look at the basic structure that John was kind enough to take you all through, which follows roughly the HUTF formula breakdown, there is inherent fairness within the structure of this, right? So when you look at the the latent outlay of the HUTF today, 60% to CDOT, 40% to cities and counties. We're taking 15% off of the CDOT side, putting that towards the multimodal fund, and then of course the local distribution formula that's applied through the HUTF. So I always like to look at status quo. The fairness that's built into the HUTF model is also represented in this particular ballot initiative. So for those folks that may have concern, that may have fear, please realize that what we experience today through the HUTF is largely what we're seeing represented as part of this ballot initiative.
That's good. Thank you. Shelley?
I have another question. I didn't articulate it very well at the first meeting I was at, and I'll try to articulate it a little better here at the special meeting today. We have the PROWAG coming forward. I think that it's going to take effect in October, if I'm not mistaken, where all us municipalities are going to be forced and asked and required to meet new federal ADA requirements. So those ADA requirements as a region are going to cost us well over $10 million to come into compliance with PROWAG. So I'm wondering if, as a region, we shouldn't contemplate, maybe not this time, But if a bond measure becomes, because of the time frame. But I think that's something for us to be contemplating as a group, maybe if this happens every year. I'm new to this group, I don't know if you guys go through this every year or not, but if you go through it every year, I would just say that for next year, maybe be ready to be contemplating how we as a region are going to bring our sidewalks into ADA compliance and at the cost of much more as a region than $10 million.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, again, I think as we're doing the development of the bicycle and pedestrian development list, part of that exercise, again, and even if it's not necessarily in the long-range plan, we can make sure it gets into the long-range plan because we are updating that at this time. If that is something where you want to have packages, again, because it's not quote-unquote a ballot list, there's no prohibition to having the smaller projects or pooling projects as part of that development list to address ADA if that's what you guys see as the priority. But again, that's totally up to you guys. That'll be part of that development process that we're going to go through here in the next couple of months. And then you guys will determine what your priorities are, and that's how that development list would be structured. Mr. Chair, one other thing. I sense that we're winding down, and I want to make sure that I understand my direction correctly. And so if I understand correctly, we do not have an additional project at this time, and although we were reluctantly, but we understand why, we understand that of the 4 projects, there's only 2 that are moving forward, and those 2 continue to have our full support, and that's fine, and we're just going to leave it at that. So tomorrow, if I get an opportunity to speak, my direction is we did thoroughly vet this. We looked at the risk and reward. We submitted these 4 projects. It was vetted through the CDOT process, so they had every opportunity. And unfortunately, these are the 2 that are remaining, but we support them, and we hope that they move forward and are funded. Is that my direction?
Yes. Anybody else feel differently? Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you. Sure. Well, yeah, I believe that the list that is going to the board tomorrow that went through all 3 committees, included these 4 projects that were going to be on that bondable list, but went all the way down to whatever 11% of that allocation was, 165 million or so, and that's kind of what we're calling our Tier 1 list. Yeah, we went a little bit above that.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Michael, I think there are a couple of things. I think first off, again, in emails that were back and forth, and perhaps I misunderstood them. I think we had talked about between the 9% as a planning target up to our population, which I believe is 13%, and I thought my understanding was that we had struck a compromise at 11%. So it was, quite frankly, news to me that CDOT was still unhappy with our 11%. But beyond that, again, this is a development list that shows what our priorities are, and quite frankly, if the ballot passes or if money falls from the sky or whatever, CDOT's going to start at the top of that list and move down. And so, as we've already seen, projects fall off of that list. And as projects fall off of that list, we want to be able to continue to have projects that are viable and ready to move forward with. So by restricting this to 9%, and I believe you've already mentioned that a majority of those projects are CDOT projects. Well, if they're CDOT projects, are they going to count towards our 9%, or they count back towards the state percent? So I'm not sure that much would be gained by having us trim off another 2% from our list. And again, quite frankly, we're going to give you the list, and if you only want to count the first 9% of it, it's really up to you. But this is our list, and from what I've been gathering is it's up to us to develop the list and pass it on. You guys have made a great point about making sure that from a planning perspective, we stay close to our targets, because if everybody did, 20 or 50% over, then it wouldn't really be a great planning exercise and the public would be confused. But there's a big difference between 20% over and 2% over. So I'm not exactly sure what CDOT's asking of us and what the point would be at this point. But you and I can have further discussions, if you'd like, offline.
Ken?
Ken Grather, PPACG. At last month's meeting, when we went through the exercise during the meeting, Brian reorganized that list, and what was my understanding, what was approved was a prioritized list. It was not just a random mixture in the Tier 1 and a random mixture in Tier 2, but it was prioritized from number 1 down to number 41. Is that correct? Isn't that what you, I thought that's what you told me. So,
with the exception of, the discussion we had earlier about some of these park and rides. Green Mountain Falls, I'm unsure of if that's still a priority, and the Northgate Park and Ride, I know it's not a priority for the city. And, I think we're also working off a 15-year-old park and ride study that has kind of been the input to this list. So, there could be some items that change or fall off or whatever. So maybe we'll get closer to that 9% number. But
so that's just a reflection of what John said, that if you, right now, for our Tier 1 list, we go through projects 1 through 19. The 9% that Michael is talking about is 1 through 15. There's a 4-project difference between the 11% and the 9%, and if we're just going down, starting at number 1 and you work down, and if this is our Tier 1, this is our prioritized project list, and for this particular purpose, CDOT wants to count 9%, then they can do that, even though we've got, our Tier 1 is 11%. And 2 months from now, we'll revise this, because we can revise the TDP any time that we want to.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Brian, are you comfortable with the order as they currently are, especially for 11 through whatever?
Yeah, for the most part, I think it's fine. And like I said, if Northgate and Green Mountain Falls comes off, that's almost $7 million off of that, and I think for the amount of time that we had at the last TAC meeting when we tried to prioritize, and then after that, I think it's in pretty good shape. Yeah.
Okay, I'm comfortable leaving it as it is.
Yeah.
And when the Denver area starts having just X% of a big pot of money, I would worry about changing ours, but given that they generally have a larger percent than we do, I'm comfortable with our list being a little bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
So I don't know that we really need to vote or anything, because really
Right.
we're just okay with where we are.
Sure. Yep.
I would have liked to have had more time to look at the ring, the trail ring. But given the amount of time that CDOT has given us to do this, I can't secure a 50% match
or even get a good number, which I'm guessing is going to be more than 10 million to do that whole thing, but like I said, given the time that we've had, I just have no way of being able to garner that, so I don't have any additional projects to
Right.
add.
Okay.
Which is a
And, you know-
shame. It would be a good project
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a ballot list.
It would be. But, I think the amount of, so 15% is going to be picked by the Transportation Commission for statewide multimodal projects. I mean, or even, the 85% for local. I mean, if we have more time to develop that as a project, I mean, that could, if there's buy-in from all the other entities, that could be a good opportunity to put a project like that in, because it has a lot of support. And so, I mean, yeah, it would have been great if we had time to do it, to get it on the bonded list, but we still could have an opportunity going forward. Yep. All right. Is there anything else anybody would like to share? All right, John, we decided, there's nothing that we need to act on. We just kind of talked this out, and we're comfortable with the list being the way it is. And we're very comfortable with leaving the list at 11%, and we feel it's prioritized pretty well. And, recognizing that about $7 million could come off if these two park and rides that aren't really a priority anymore come off. But I don't really think we need to stress much about trying to get it down to 9%. We all
Well,
gotta give that
so while our formal action at the last TAC was for the 4 projects, now we're down to 2. You sure we don't want to do a formal action for the 2?
Well, no, John's going to be explaining
He
this
was that?
tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, because these were all developments that happened after all the committees met, after the packet went out to the board, so.
Okay.
And I
it's-
would rather not vote to say, yes, take projects off.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd rather our formal recommendation be these 4 projects.
Remains what it was.
Yeah,
Right,
Okay.
because we didn't take them off.
Right.
Exactly, Brandy.
yeah. Okay. All right, thank you, everyone, and thanks for coming to the special meeting, and we're adjourned. Thank you.